Hello. Hi, everybody. So I have a very, let me make sure we're recording, and we are, good. So I have a very kind of limited agenda, but I do have a few things on my list, and then we are in kind of a great position. We have some time to, take questions. We can do a little Ask Me Anything if you would like. So I did receive a couple of questions over email, and I'm definitely going to address those. But if anybody who is IRL has questions that they want to share with me, you have that opportunity. So if you can give me just a couple of minutes to kind of get through some of the stuff on my list here. Basically today we're just kind of cleaning up this unit and getting ready to move on. So if we just look at the calendar for a second, I built in some sort of unstructured time for us so that in case we felt like we needed to spend more time reviewing stuff, we could. So lo, the day has come. So commence the unstructured time. I have two things that I want to point out to you, and then I can start to move into the questions that I got over email, and then we can transition to questions from all of you. So let me double check that we are recording. Okay, good. So one thing that I wanted to show you, you may have been seeing this kind of like popping back and forth on the Canvas thing. I'm not going to take time to watch this video in class. It's a short, sort of 20-minute video that you can watch sort of on your own time. For some reason, I decided to wrap it in a slide. Not 100% sure why I did that. But yeah, it's a video about computer graphics and 3D rendering and kind of the state of the art in that field. But it's also about the relationship of computer graphics to art and entertainment, and kind of how the economy of computer graphics works. So I would certainly take a few minutes to kind of watch this video. I will be asking you some questions on it in the final exam. It's only about 15 minutes, and it's made by this guy named Alan Warburton, who himself is a computer graphics artist. And so it's sort of like straight from the horse's mouth, as we used to say. So I did just want to point that out to you, that that's kind of been riding along with us in these Canvas modules. And that I will have at least one, maybe two questions on the final exam drawn from that video. And also, if you have any interest in the topic whatsoever, it's a really interesting, like beautifully produced video. And it has a lot of great examples of contemporary computer graphics art. So just wanted to tell you about that. Also, I did just want to kind of direct you to the fact that next week we are starting a new unit. And that new unit is the code unit. Excuse me. Hang on. Sorry, definitely not contagious. I just ate an apple, and it didn't work out quite right. So anyway, yeah, we'll be getting into code. If you haven't been sort of paying attention to the Canvas modules, code is our last unit in the class. You know what that means? Summer's coming. Although you would not know it from that temperature outside. I'm one of those really poor, terrible people that looked outside the window and was like, oh, it looks great. And it's like 35 degrees outside, in case anyone has noticed, and it's also really windy. So that's the downside of being a Floridian, is that you're easily fooled. So by sunshine, that is, not everything. So that being said, I think I'm going to kind of like move into the questions that I got over email. And actually, I do have one more thing I'm going to show you. So I wanted to make a high-resolution image, a high-resolution render test. And I guess we could go ahead and just use it, although it's not completely finished. So what, you ask? It's not finished. When did you start that render, Meg? Oh, gosh. I probably started it 6 hours after our last class. Why is it taking so long? Well, as I said, it's a high-resolution rendering. The rendering comparison that I made for all of you all is right here. And you can definitely see some differences. These render times are much more sort of suitable. And the reason that they are a little less crazy is because we're basically doing this batch was at the sort of size that you would need for your project in this class. So it's like that 1080, 1920 kind of size. So this one took about 2 minutes. This was done with the Rhino Legacy render. How can I tell right away that it was done with the Rhino Legacy render? For me, some of the hallmarks of the Legacy render are that it doesn't do quite as nice a job on shadows. So you can see that our spotlights were set to be hard spotlights, and that's definitely reflected here in the rendering. It did some things pretty well. Like, I mean, these shadows look pretty nicely developed. It's got some translucency here. This stuff all came out pretty well. But overall, I would say it has a little bit of a soft look to it. And when you see the other one, will definitely see the difference. So here's the Rhino Legacy render. And then here is the ray traced render. And you might be like, oh, wow, that's different. There is definitely a difference. Is one better or worse than the other? It kind of depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for sort of softer looking light and in general, kind of softer looking image, the Rhino render or the ray trace render might be better for you. This ray trace render at sort of project size took about 2 hours. And you can see the spotlight area is much sort of softer and has this beautiful gradation. It's got quite a bit more detail in some of these areas. If we flip back. And just in general, there's sort of a palpable difference in the way that the lighting is interpreted by that renderer. So is it a huge, massive difference? Again, if 2 hours of your life are worth something to you, then maybe it doesn't matter. It's up to you. In Rhino, I actually have a rendering going right now that I'm going to cut out of. So I'm going to go ahead and quit this rendering. I'll probably just do it on my workstation at home, and it'll probably take about 10 minutes. But I did kind of want to do it for sort of like real-world testing purposes. So this is at 3,000 by 2,000 pixels. I'm using the Rhino render, which is the slower of the two renders. And it is coming through, right now it's just about a little bit over halfway finished. And you can see it's taking forever. It's been going for 38 hours. Now, of course, every time I close my laptop, because I'm like, in a lecture and I don't want to offend somebody, or maybe I have to go to sleep, or my laptop goes to sleep, it's going to just suspend that render, and it's going to catch up with it, excuse me, when I bring my laptop back online. So certainly, using something like a workstation, that's one of the reasons why workstations are generally used for this kind of work, is because they usually don't have that interruption of travel and, being kind of like attached to a person like laptops do. Let me go into Rhino real quickly. I'm going to just go ahead and suspend this render. Yes, I would like to stop. Excuse me. I do want to show you, this is going to take a second to kind of finish. You'll see here there's this parameter of a path tracing sample. I have it yanked up super high right now, so it's 1,500 ray trace steps. Now, basically what a ray trace is like, okay, I've got this light, and the computer is saying, okay, this light comes from here, and then it goes to here, and then it bounces here, and then it hits glass, and then it hits me, and it does that for every single photon in the whole scene. So the way that the Rhino render works is that it takes that bouncing process, or people call it ray tracing, and it actually will cycle multiple times, and then it will kind of average the results, right? So the more samples, or the more path tracing samples you have, the more sort of tightly organized and sharp your image will be. If we go in here to render settings, and in fact, just full disclosure, by the way, I've had a couple of issues just recently with using the render settings here. Like when I click this button, it doesn't actually open up the render settings. There's another sort of much more foolproof way to do it, which is to go up here to the render menu and then click render properties. So if anybody has that problem of not being able to access the render settings, that's sort of the fix that I found. So here I have Rhino render checked. And I really don't sort of like get into any sort of like that number of 1,500 bouncing things isn't really visible to me when I come in here. It's really dictated by whether you're in good quality, final quality, or, you know, so on and so forth. So I'm pretty sure that draft quality is 500 bounces, and then good quality is like 1,000 bounces, and then final quality is 1,500 bounces. So does it make your image better? Sure, to a point, but if it looks great at 500, why would you do 1,000 more, right? So one thing I noticed is that as I was in this doing the Rhino render on the higher resolution one that took quite a bit more time, as it kind of got up into the 500 to 800 bounce range, I felt like, yeah, that's totally like good enough. I could just stop there, and it would be beautiful. So that is kind of an option as to, and in general, when you're doing the renderings, I would see what a draft quality rendering looks like and how long it takes, and then if that works and it goes well, but maybe you want it to be a little sharper and a little nicer, then go one step up and kind of iterate through it rather than going straight for the final quality rendering, because those final quality renderings can take absolutely absurd amounts of time, and it might not be worth it. So, okay, so that's just a couple of words about the different rendering models, and in general, just gonna give you another look at this. The Rhino render produces what I would call a totally satisfactory result. It's a little bit more contrasty, like from dark to light. And then when we look at the sort of ray traced render, it definitely has like a more kind of like modeled, sort of like smooth, light appearance. Your choice. Okay, so now there's one other issue that somebody mentioned to me over online that I can't replicate directly, but I can kind of describe the problem, and then I can show you all what my personal sort of fixes would be, because it's definitely a problem that I have had before in Rhino. So that problem is basically you do something in Rhino, you move stuff around. Maybe you're doing some process, or maybe you're just, panning through the view. And all of a sudden, like, components of the model that you've created start kind of dropping out or failing to display. That is a thing that happens. I've seen it many times. Usually, a couple of solutions for that. I have 3 solutions. One is to actually pan so that there's nothing in the view, and then pan back to where you are. Sometimes that just is enough to like refresh the pixels. Take some heart that if that does happen to you, your model is not messed up. It's totally a screen, like graphics card issue that Rhino has. So it's nothing wrong with your model, and it's nothing that is going to hurt your model. The other thing that I would consider doing if that happened to me and that sort of panning approach doesn't work, or even maybe just like a zoom selected to sort of rearrange the pixels on the screen. The other thing that can help is if you right-click within the window. No, thank you. Right-click or control-click within the window and do this set view and reset your view. So you can reset it to the top, bottom, etc. So here we can reset it to top. That will potentially refresh the screen buffer. The other thing you can do is restart Rhino. That's it. 1, 2, 3. Those are the 3 things you can do. Hopefully, obviously, the first 2 are much nicer, and then the third one is kind of annoying when you have to restart Rhino. But probably what I've heard from other people, and actually have heard from the manufacturer of Rhino, is that Rhino is not sort of like guaranteed to be compatible with all graphics cards. And so if you have that problem, there's not a whole lot you can do. It's specific to your computer and your graphics card. And it might be actually using a different computer, you may have that problem less. So if you do have the option to use a different workstation, and if you're continuing to have this problem, maybe reinstalling Rhino, potentially, if you're on a PC, reinstalling your graphics card drivers. Those would all be options as well. Those are kind of like labor-intensive, advanced options. OK, so another request from online. Someone said, hey, Meg, can you go over making a 3D print again? So it just so happens that we have a couple of 3D printed objects here in this scene. And so if I were to kind of just go through and think about what is 3D printable in this scene, well, certainly these little grass clumps would be 3D printable because this sort of spire that they are originated from is fully solid. The bottom part of the boat would definitely be 3D printable. Not so much this area. We would just have to make a couple of tiny little modifications. I'll just go ahead and tell you what I would do. I would actually take these poles. Nope, this. Well, that's not. I bet I probably, locked. Sometimes you think it's you, and then you realize not so much. So probably the only issue here with the wings on the boat, there's maybe a couple small things that I want to point out. This surface is a single surface. So unless we extruded it to have a tiny bit of thickness, it would not be 3D printable. When I was designing it, did I care? Absolutely not. Like, I was designing something for the screen, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, if we wanted to make that 3D printable, we could potentially just add some thickness to that. The other thing that might be potentially an issue is just structurally not having these. Sorry, let me. Having these be sort of maybe larger than the boat itself, they would probably, and they don't have like a whole lot of material kind of connecting them to the boat, so they would have a tendency to just pop off if they were 3D printed. So I would maybe just rethink the design of that a little bit and maybe just give it a little more oomph, maybe like a little ramping object to kind of hold them to the side of the boat, like a little cornice or something. And then, but the frames themselves are actually fully 3D printable. I just think printing this entire thing would be pretty fragile because they would just be literally suspended in the air, just kind of waiting to break off. The interior of the boat, though, is fantastically 3D printable. No problem there at all. And then this lamp thing, is also 3D printable. So I think I'm going to use as my example this lamp thing. And I'm just going to open a new Rhino file. So you don't have to put it on its own file. We could just use the select it and use the export selected method. It can be kind of nice to put stuff on their own sort of file when you're 3D printing, because then you can scale them to a certain scale. I'm not going to worry about that too much. But anyway, this is ready to go. We can go ahead and save it as a 3D printable format. Sorry, my trackpad skills are like trash today. I don't know what is going on. Yes, please. Okay. So active viewport. Okay, so so this is totally 3D printable. It's got some holes in it. That's absolutely fine. You may recall that instead of having it be a single surface, we went ahead and shelled it before we poked the holes through it. So you can see it's got this thickness to it, right? It's not some lonely surface that's a figment of our imagination. So all we have to do is select the object in any file. It can be a file with lots of stuff going on or nothing going on, like this file. And you want to go to Export Selected. You can also just do a regular export if it's the only thing in the file. I'm just a little bit superstitious about that because some 3D print softwares, if there are any curves or anything like that, they'll reject the file. So it's just my own kind of hang-ups, I guess. So I guess I could call this maybe lamp. That's super creative. And then under the format, this is the part that really matters. Stick it there. And we want to not export it as a Rhino file. We want to export it as an STL file. So STL is sort of like the universal format for 3D printing. If you are working with Shapeways or some sort of very contemporary 3D printing software, you may also have the option to use an OBJ. Is there any difference in those two file formats? Yeah, I mean, in this case, we're just saving geometry. STL as a file format is only capable of holding geometry. It doesn't hold textures or color or anything like that. OBJ can actually hold a material file, so you can actually save the material with the object. That can be kind of cool if you want to maybe stick it into some other design sometime and have a material come along with it. Usually when you send it out for 3D printing, they just discard the material file. So we're going to use STL because that's the most common. And export. For tolerance, you may want to hit the preview button and kind of think about it. So here, you can kind of expand the window, and you can think a little bit about your tolerance. So it looks to me like, based on the preview that we're seeing right now, that some of these areas, it looks, this is not a technical term, but it looks a little chunky, meaning that these large chunks could potentially be visible when you 3D print it as flat spots. So if we turn the tolerance to a smaller value, give it an extra 0, we can then probably get a much more high-resolution mesh. So you can see now we're in super high-resolution zone. I think the guideline that I gave you all on the 3D printing document was something like that for large objects, which this is a large object right now. So basically you're kind of just looking for it to look like a fine mesh. You don't want it so fine that you can't see the individual faces, because then it's just going to make a giant file that's really cumbersome, and it's not necessary. Because as you all know, 3D printers have their own kind of resolution, right? There's only so much detail that a 3D printer can capture. So having a file that's a billion megabytes large to capture all this smoothness, it sounds like a good idea, but the 3D printer is not going to be able to replicate that. So you're kind of just wasting file space. So yeah, this looks like a very kind of high resolution mesh right now. So you can just click OK. And it does give you this a couple of prompts. So it asks you whether you would want to use ASCII or binary. For 99% of people, it makes absolutely no difference. The only reason why I would ever use an ASCII STL file is if I'm writing code to control it, and I want to actually read the file with code, because then with ASCII, you can actually do that. With binary, I guess technically you could do it with binary too, but then you'd have to make a binary interpreter, and that would be terrible. So for regular old 3D printing, it does not matter. So export. And I should be able to now find it. That would be a miracle. Let's see. Okay. So here's my file. You can see with STL and OBJ, Mac OS actually does a pretty good job of previewing them in the Finder now. Yeah, here it is, fully 3D printable. So the other reason why I would say this would be a really great, why is this the best 3D model from an economy standpoint, as opposed to all the other objects that we looked at in our file? Because it is hollow. And how are you billed when you make a 3D print? You are billed by volume of material. So this would also be potentially the cheapest 3D print, would definitely be the hollow one. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you where Shapeways is. So then to make it, you can either go to your local makerspace, or my recommendation would be to go to Shapeways and create an account. And it's super easy. You just upload the model, and then you put in a size, and then it gives you a list of materials that may be compatible with design. Obviously, I'm not asking anybody to 3D print in gold, although, that can be really super fun if you have a special person out there. But yeah, just whatever the economy material is, it's usually sintered white nylon, is the most economical, and that would be totally fine for the extra credit point. Okay, so those are my online questions. Do I have any questions from the people here? Yes. Colored lighting, sure. Yeah, so in fact, I totally made a version of our file that had colored lighting at home, and then I kind of for some reason decided not to use it. Okay, so probably, in my opinion, the best we've got a couple of opportunities for colored lighting in this file. So let's start with these two spotlights. So if you select the light, you should be able to come over here to the side panels. If anyone has not gotten annoyed by these yet, boy, you're lucky. How do I switch to the panel that's supposed to pop up when I get a light? If you click this button over here and just show properties panel, it'll pop up. So that's kind of annoying. Anyway, so yeah, you just click on the color, and you might notice I have a bunch of colors already saved down here. So maybe I want some kind of sort of just warm. This will just add a tiny bit of warmth to the affair. So I'll do that one. That's pretty subtle. I might actually choose something less subtle because we're on the projector. Maybe this one, yeah. Okay, so now I think you've got a much better sort of idea of what that might look like. So it's super, super subtle. I'm going to choose something a little bit less subtle for this other light, where using kind of some of the rules of color can actually be a big benefit here. So here, in this case, we have a warm and a cool light that are sort of converging on each other. And that can be really interesting because it can kind of add some dimension to the objects around it. Let's see. If we want to choose something way less subtle, you know, I'm not even 100% convinced that we can see that on the projector, but I'm sure it'll be visible in the video. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of some elements so just I can select the lights a little bit more easily. I'm going to get rid of the boat, and what the heck, I'll get rid of, yeah. Now, I just wanted to get to a place where I could sort of select these objects easily. So it just so happens that there are 3 point lights inside this sort of lamp object. And if I wanted to get way less subtle, I can probably select some forms that will, okay, so my intensity here was down all the way. So you can see now if I roll it back up, it's kind of, you can definitely see that pink coming in there, right? And then if I just move up and down here, I've got 3 point lights, I believe. So it'll pop up again in the panel here. And then maybe here we want to add some blue. And then up here, let's add some yellow. I want it to look really warm, so I'm choosing like the brightest yellow I have. So now you can kind of see we have this like kind of confetti look going on. What you will notice though is that in some of the areas where the light is sort of doubling up, you can definitely see there is color mixing happening. So if I bring in like this area, so these areas are for sure doing additive mixing. So yeah, I think color, in general, color in the light can be really exciting. I've seen it used in a lot of different ways. I mean, people can definitely, like if you're making like an underground layer or something like a dungeon, you can have like green or red lights, and you know, it gets like real super weird. So that can be kind of fun. Other questions? Yeah. No, it's I mean, what do you mean by produce light? Mm-hmm. Emissive, yeah, yeah. No, that is totally a thing that you can do. I would say that's a little bit like, I probably just haven't gotten to it because it's a little bit on the advanced side. But yeah, you can, I mean, the point light is probably like, I like using the point light because it just goes everywhere and then you can constrain it with an object or with something like that. Making an object into a light source is totally something that I would do. But I usually use objects as light in kind of a smaller situations. So like if I needed a light for right here, you know, just making like a little rectangle there and turning that into an emissive object would actually be helpful because it's you know, it's not something that needs to kind of light the whole room. I can't think of any downside to using emissive objects. It's just kind of like, you know, a little bit sort of like, because yeah, definitely, I mean, when you get into materials in that sense, like, you know, anything can be a light source. Just kind of fun, yeah. Other questions? I'm just gonna hang around until, I've got 10 minutes. Hi. Yes. So, I'm gonna go back to my construction curves. I haven't had an opportunity to do that yet. So it's like justifying my whole existence. Yeah, basically it looks like I have a construction curve right here that I could sort of recreate the lamp with. So we can do that. So yeah, to do this lamp, I first used the Revolve function in the surface menu. So, and I sort of just picked like a random point. I'm just using the ortho right now, and I'm going to do it on full circle. So I can't promise that it'll look exactly the same because I didn't measure or anything. But basically, what you get when you revolve is you get sort of like just what we were talking about in the 3D printing sort of section just now. You get this, wonderful object that's actually not 3D printable because it's only has a sort of single fictional surface boundary. So what we need to do is we need to actually make this into 100% solid. So I used cap planar holes, and that puts a cap on the top and bottom to turn it into a solid. And then once it's a solid, and by the way, if I actually wanted to just take this object as it is now and intersect stuff into it, that would be completely legit. It was just kind of a design choice along the process that we would make it, that we would hollow out the top and bottom. So to do that, you would go to use the shell command and just hit enter. And then it asks you to remove certain faces. So I definitely want to remove this top face. And then also, it would be nice if I could remove the bottom face. So I think probably just getting rid of the room will allow me to do that. There we go. And here it's asking me for a thickness parameter. And you may remember that this grid was about 1 inch for every large unit. So probably somewhere between 0.25, a quarter, and an eighth would be a nice thickness. So I'll give it a 0.125. And then it asks to select faces to remove. So I'm going to actually select, everything apparently. I'm going to go back to that function just by hitting enter. And it asks me to select the faces that I want to remove. So these would be the faces where, they're completely open. And then I still had the parameter in there for the 0.125. So now this is at that phase where we, after this, we joined, the poking through crazy objects. Yeah. Seven minutes. Any questions? Yeah. Oh, I'll take a question in the back because I have gotten one from them. Uh-huh. Okay, so that's a fantastic question. I have a couple of ideas. So one way to think about making a surface. Actually, going to make a new file here. So one way to think about making a surface would be, you've got, basically, if you look at this menu, you've got all of these options. And it sounds like what you're asking about is like a maybe more complicated, because we've been over a couple of options but these don't sound like what you're looking for. Like options like Revolve, where you can start with a curve and then extrude it, and those are good for making sort of like sweepy curves or that sort of thing. You could certainly, let's see, make you can make a surface from control point grid, And so in this case, it lets you set points like rows and columns, which as you're kind of doing it, you're like, well, that doesn't sound very interesting. Like, I don't want a table, but it's not going to give you a table, don't worry. So here we've got number of points in row. Maybe let's just like set that to 10. And then number of points in column, you can set that to 10. And then it asks you to sort of like draw the points. And I'm just sort of like clicking through. It takes a second to get them all set up. Anyway, sorry, I don't actually think that that might be the greatest thing. I don't think that's what I'm looking for. Give me just 1 second. It's not the kind of thing that I would necessarily do myself a lot. Nope. Just going to go to the regular surface menu here. Okay. You know what? I might have to do a tiny bit of research on that, but I can definitely find the answer for you. It's some version of like a patch or a drape. I'm just not seeing it in the surface menu now. So I can either follow through with you over email, or we can, just kind of think about it next class. Probably thinking about it over email would be better because then, we'll be in code next week. But yeah, I can definitely figure that out for you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh, you're asking in reference to that question? Sure. Yeah, you could definitely use sweep rail, which we've kind of already done. So yeah, we can demonstrate that super quickly. I guess I sort of think about that as like not exactly what she's asking about, but yeah, we can definitely like think about that. So yeah, if you make a curve, and then you make another curve, like right here, I can just make another curve that's sort of touching it. And I'm going to go ahead and just disable ortho temporarily so I can make a little quick curve. Yeah, so what the question was is, could I use a method like sweep rail or something like that? And yeah, you definitely could, and you would get a certain result. So here, you could use sweep one rail. So this would be the object that we're sweeping, and this would be the rail. So this is the sweep shape. Hit enter. Excuse me. So sweep shapes. And then you get something that looks like one shape was sort of moved against another shape. That's sort of, I think, maybe sort of what you're looking for. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that if you do get a surface like this, you can also turn on the control points. And then you have all these points that you can mess up. So what I was trying to do was create a situation where you had maybe like 100 of those, you know, that you could kind of lift and sort of, you know, move according to your will. So there is an option in Rhino to create like a grid of these that you can sort of just pop up and down. I think it might be some like patch or drape. I would just have to try them and just check it out. Yeah. All right. Well, I certainly don't want to distract you from your other things. Thanks for coming. If you have any further questions, I'm super happy to answer those over email. Sometimes it takes a few minutes, you know. So yeah, have a great weekend, everyone.